Good morning, everybody. Welcome. If you are looking for the meeting of the Oregon Housing Stability Council for January 10th, 2025, you are in the right place. We have opened up the virtual room. We've got 80 some people in the room right now, but more than 180 signed up. So we want to give you a chance to get settled in, put your feet up on a virtual chair, and get ready to do some important business in just another minute or two. At this point, we'll get the meeting underway, and I will formally convene the Oregon Housing Stability Council for January 10th, 2025. And first thing on the agenda is a roll call of the membership.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFantorum.
Here.
Councilmember Farrell.
Present.
Chair Hall.
Here.
Councilmember Lee.
Here.
Councilmember Mena.
Here.
Councilmember Rogers. Councilmember Harris.
Here.
Councilmember Meehan.
Here.
Councilmember Willard. With 2 council members absent, we still do have quorum, Chair Hall.
Great. So we move to review and follow up action items. And did we have any for this month's meeting?
Yes, we do. One moment, let me transition documents. We do have a few updates this month to report out on regarding the down payment assistance and rules tied to OHCS lending. The request was to see if a forgivable loan option for DPA under the approved DPA rules tied to OHCS home ownership lending. We have an update that the Home Ownership Division is currently working with our financial advisors around including forgiveness options. We are very close to an answer, and we will be able to share an answer by our February meeting. Regarding the LIHTC and ORCA update, there was an ask to create talking points centered around what it actually costs to build an affordable rental housing system. The Affordable Rental Housing Division is continuing to work on determining needed talking points related to the cost of development and expect to have those ready within the first quarter of 2025. They will share and circulate with Housing Stability Council as those are finalized. Regarding the LIFT program framework, there was a desire to see more outreach to rural communities that were underserved. We are engaging with our division to improve our outreach efforts to rural, underserved communities. We are planning on meeting with stakeholders to develop a system that could track and record our efforts and anticipate having this in place by the second quarter of 2025. Regarding the LIFT program framework and OHTC expansion for home ownership is developing a team. There was wondered if there was a way to have some consistency with the affordable rental housing, specifically within the equity shared model. The update is the home ownership is developing a team of staff to work closely with ARH to ensure more consistency. We are also exploring if an other shared equity model has been developed and share the lessons learned. We expect to work We expect work will be completed in the second quarter of 2025. That is the updates.
All right, any questions, feedback from staff or council on any of these items? Okay, well, hearing none, we'll move to the report of the chair. And hey, we're celebrating a new year, a turning of a leaf on the calendar, but really it's if we're pausing, it's a very brief pause because we've got to keep right on doing this work we're doing today. And as I was looking through the packet for today, one thing I was very happy to see is that one of the projects before us today is the M. Carter Commons in Portland. I think it is wonderful that we're able to look back and recognize one of Oregon's most distinguished state legislators in our recent history, and that is Margaret Carter. She holds the distinction of being the first Black woman ever to be elected to the Oregon legislature. That happened in 1984. She came to Oregon from Louisiana to escape poverty and an abusive relationship, and it was here that her star shone brightly. She went on to serve 22 years in both the Senate and House and distinguished herself as a human services champion. Following her retirement from the legislature, she worked at DHS. And I haven't now even begun to scratch the surface of a truly distinguished lifetime of service to the people of Oregon. I find her story inspiring in so many ways. And as I watch more and more leaves fall from my own calendar, I think of her words when she turned 85 a few years ago. I still have work left to do. Well, we all have work to do. Let's plunge into it with purpose and joy. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Director Bell for the director's report.
Morning, and thank you, Chair Hall. Good morning, council members. Good to see you. Good to be in virtual community. I have one brief update for the council. Maybe before I dive into that, I would just want to continue to lift up, since we are in the spirit of trying new things on, particularly around documenting of either items or requests from the council member, and then making sure that we are establishing continuity of those updates during the monthly council meetings. We just want to both continue to be open to any feedback about how to make sure we're spending the right time or too much time or the right detail on that. So we'll remain open to feedback as we continue to perfect that or get that right, make that useful during our agenda and our meetings rather. One update I wanted to provide was regarding the tracking of housing production. So regarding the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. So it's been some time since we have brought this in front of council. I am aiming to bring it either at a February or our March meeting, since there are some significant updates to both how the ONA methodology has changed, but also OHCS's responsibility as part of that methodology with the broader goal of tracking housing production. I want to make sure that the council both has some visibility to insight as to where we are at, and then think about what might be most useful and of interest for the council. Just for broader purview, the ONA, so the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis, that is the methodology by which we estimate regional housing needs across our state. And so that estimation looks at an examination of our existing housing stock. It also provides analysis regarding housing shortage, and then seeks to make an estimate of the housing units that we need here in the state of Oregon for the next 2 decades. It then allocates those housing needs to each local government within a particular region, and then creates housing production targets and goals for cities with a population of 10,000 or more. So this work is done. Certainly OHCS has an important role and responsibility, but it's also partnership with the Department of Administrative Services and the Office of Economic Analysis, Eco Northwest, and then of course DLCD as well. more specifically to OHCS's role, is primarily in two parts. So that is first the Housing Equity Indicators Dashboard, and then also the Housing Production Dashboard. So as part of the Housing Equity Indicators Dashboard, it includes several kind of key things that are consistent themes that we talk about here at council, but also consistent themes that you all have really pushed us to really make sure that we are taking and planning the due diligence on the framework to collect that data, and then continuing to push and ask and have important conversations about how we use that data and what we're doing with it. So within the Housing Equity Indicator dashboards, it's looking at some of the obvious things: cost burden, availability of housing, both rental and ownership, but also includes housing conditions for different demographics, looks at race, ethnicity, disability status. One of the other elements in there that I think is of note is it also looks at risk of gentrification or displacement, and then housing segregation by race and income. So because we're having and will continue to have so many important conversations about data, how we use it, and then how's it driving policy and decision, I want to make sure that the council is aware of that. And then in terms of the housing production dashboard, that is really seeking to account for and capture progress regarding any city's progress towards the total housing production unit that is set in the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis. It also includes some other attributes. I won't go through the exhaustive list, but one of those is just a city's progress towards supported housing unit targets that are set as part of the overall ONA methodology. So both of those dashboards are up and available. As of right now, the plan is that those would be updated. Those would be updated annually. So within council's forthcoming written update, we'll provide I'll provide more concrete information and more exhaustive information, and then also a link to those dashboards, because I think they'll be important over the trajectory of accounting for housing production, and then also seeing where we're getting it right and where we're getting it, where there's area of opportunity, and then to be able to look at some granularity about who. I think it's one thing to have overall housing progress, but also making sure that we're looking at some of the other elements of where things have gone wrong in the past, and we seek to get that right. So that will be included in a forthcoming written update for council, and then that will be a future agenda item for either February and March, and there'll be an opportunity to, of course, help shape what we bring to council so that we can narrow that in for things that council might be most interested in. So that's it for me at the moment. Chair, if there's any particular questions or feedback around that now, I'm happy to take it. And then just know there'll be an opportunity to help shape that on the front end. Oh, looks like you might be on mute, Chair Hall.
Sorry, I apologize for that. So do we have any feedback, comments for Director Bell at this point? And if not, we'll have others down the way. So we'll move now to the Affordable Rental Housing the Affordable Housing Rental Division. Come on, I got my sleep last night. I've had my coffee. Anyway, are we ready to go? First off, with a public hearing. And I'll just call to the council's attention, if you haven't already seen in your email, a lot of written comment came in on this topic yesterday and into the evening. I'd encourage you, if you haven't had the chance, to review all of that. And as I understand, we've got 2 people signed up for this public hearing. This public hearing is being held in accordance with ORS 456.561. And so we'll open that hearing now. And who do we have signed up first?
Julia Delgado.
Julia Delgado, are you on the line?
I do not see her name, but there are a few phone-only folks.
Okay. And
Raise
if,
hand function of *9.
Mhm. We did have one other person sign up. I believe.
Yes, Bonnie Craig.
Okay, Bonnie Craig, are you on the line, please?
Yes, I'm on the line. Can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. And the guideline for testimony is 3 minutes, so begin when you're ready.
Wonderful, thank you. My name is Bonnie Craigie. For the record, I work for Rural Community Assistance Corporation. And do you need my address or anything like that for the formal proceeding?
No, we
Okay.
can reach out to you by email for that.
Okay, thank you. The main point that I wanted to communicate is that there has been a lot of comment on this qualified allocation plan, and some of these comments are really essential to the QAP operating in a healthy manner, so to speak. And the most important thing about the public comment process is that it needs to be thoughtfully evaluated and incorporated. So the important message that I have today is to please review the comments and think about them carefully and incorporate them. And could we please have a red line version of the QAP after these comments have been considered and incorporated as appropriate? And that is my request for the day. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for your input. All right. And that concludes the folks we have signed up. And I will put out one request if you want to testify during this public hearing, again, on the QAP revisions, and this is under 456.561 of the ORS. One more opportunity. I'd say use your raise hand function or hold your peace, at least for now. Okay. Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to transactions. And who's taking the lead for affordable rental housing?
Chair Hall. Hello, this is Natasha Detweiler-Davy, Director Affordable Rental Housing here at OHCS. And so I'm happy to be with you here this morning to go through some good conversations and great direction for the work to continue to move forward. And so I have here, I think Ty Denson-Strain will take the lead on the first transaction presentation for M. Carter Commons. So I will hand it off to him and get the screen sharing going.
For the record, Ty Denson-Strain, assistant director for transactions, and good morning. And I guess we can still say Happy New Year since I haven't been in virtual community with you folks. Chair Hall, Director Bell. So I'm here today to present M. Carter Commons. As Chair Hall mentioned, this is named after the Oregon's first Black woman legislator, Margaret Louisa Carter. The project is a senior building sponsored by Urban League of Portland, Northwest Housing Alternatives, and just wanted to formally thank Urban League and Northwest Housing Alternatives. It's that this is going to be a great project, and we look forward to getting this phase done. And there's always more work to be done. This is an important milestone. And just for the record, there's a updated note to the final bond amount included. We're just there was last minute typo that we caught. It's just wanted to flag that in advance as we proceed through this recommendation. But I will also note this formally the conduit bond amount is an up to not to exceed amount of $21,500,000. The project was previously awarded LIFT funds and has been awarded Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credits. It includes a range of units for studios, one bedrooms and from a range of AMI targets, and includes rental assistance provided by Home Forward, and also includes two elevators and heating and cooling system units and AC units in each of the units. The project is slated to be completed. The financial closing is at the end of this month. Next slide. The partners have committed strategies in place to serving the BIPOC communities. Urban League of Portland has a long-standing presence in the metro region, serving BIPOC communities since 1945. Their general contractor, Walsh O'Neill, is committed to our MWSB goals, and the Urban League is also in partnership working with Cascade Management will be as the management agent on this project. With that, I'm happy to answer any questions you folks may have. And as mentioned previously, there's a recommended updated bond motion that's here, but we will also update that in the packet.
There I go again. Commissioner Rogers. You're up.
Thank you, Chair Hall. This project is really exciting, as is the rest of them, but I was just curious as far as the location. Where in Portland?
So it's in the Albina district. It's actually on land donated from Kaiser Permanente. So I get it's part of their close to their old campus site in over near the Albina district.
Okay, thank you.
Council, any more questions or feedback? Well, you're making it easy so far. Then I believe we're ready to consider the motion on page 9 of your packet as revised. So would somebody like to put this before us?
So moved.
Thank you. And is there a second, please?
Second.
Any further discussion? Okay, could we have a roll call then, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFontorum.
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Harris.
Yes.
Councilmember Mead.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Very good. All right, now orca. And sometimes in my head, I have to think orca on land because we have orcas right out here in the ocean, just not far from my doorstep, which we're so lucky for. So let's move into that presentation.
Great. Thank you, Chair Hall, Housing Stability Council, Director Bell. Really excited to be here today to be able to talk about the framework that we'll be asking you to consider for adoption that will allow us to finalize the QAP and be able to offer the low-income housing tax credit and other resources through the ORCA in this calendar year. And so I think of this as really moving to the full implementation of the ORCA so that we can really see how this all works as a system with all resources active and pipeline in development. So I think I aim to cover a bunch of different topic areas. Obviously, we have a lot of intricate and interconnected topics that are all wrapped into all of the public comment we received. So we'll walk through that. I think speaking to the public comment that we heard this morning, I think for clarity, absolutely will be incorporating public comment, sharing red lines as we navigate the final wrap up of responsive QAP. But I'm going to just, scroll too fast in my PowerPoint. But first, so what I aim to do here first is talk a little bit about our journey of where we have gone to get to this place with this recommendation to integrate the ORCA and low-income housing tax credits for 2025. So I'll start about that and then go talk through public comment and then review the framework for adoption. So in terms of, you've been on a journey with us in this work for a very long time, and I know there's been a lot of components to that. When we initially implemented the ORCA, we knew we didn't have actively low-income housing tax credits to offer for 2024. So we made the intentional decision to prioritize really building the system of the ORCA, knowing that we then would take on incorporating tax credits. And so we did that. Between September, October, really November, and also some December in there, we have engaged with partners to gather input and put together frameworks for the detailed process and information around both updates to the ORCA as well as the qualified allocation plan to incorporate these resources, and also make some of those refinements that we have committed to regarding the ORCA to make sure that we are not but that we are actively addressing identified and consistent challenges as we go and as we continue to build out our systems. In November, we introduced and presented the key themes from engagement, as well as introduced those initial policy frameworks, the detailed process, as well as the kind of overarching policy element. We then posted the draft qualified allocation plan as well as conduit bond charges as a way of really gathering formal comment on all of those, a large slate of issues. I will spend some time talking through what we are seeing in public comments this morning, and also I think the public comments received, I think, incredibly grateful for the really broad expertise that is providing us a really deep insight to the experience in navigating to a change system. And I think we all know that the change system is not just a one, we do this different application and there's not implications. I think there are then, organizations that are practiced at accessing resources in one way, and we're asking them to do this differently. And that really is taking some, overall system time to grow and learn together. And so I'm, and I think we are intentionally working to ensure that we are doing that in really close relationship and doing our job to balance that collaboration and support with balanced accountability to make sure projects are holding standards, are doing their work well and with this appropriate expertise on those teams. We did hold a formal virtual public hearing for the qualified allocation plan where we heard from partners as well with additional public comment. So we've received written and verbal public comment, and I think to my earlier point are tracking all of those detailed comments, and I'll be able to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. Today where we are aiming to make a recommendation around the kind of policy frame that is, that all of the QAP and ORCA fall under. And so with that framework, if we get that framework adopted, we will have the ability to finalize the QAP in response to public comment, all to allow us to then be able to offer low-income housing tax credits this year. I think from a timeliness perspective, just for, a lot of our resources, they're not time sensitive. That is not the case for tax credits. We get annual allocations of 9% tax credits that the state either spends or needs to return back to the national pool. And we have the private activity bonds, which are allocated from the federal government to the state on an annual basis and need to either be spent or spent within a complicated timeline, but they are annually given and are the opportunity, I think, across all of it for low-income housing tax credits. They bring private equity to support our general production. So that credit, though it's not $1, it gets private funds to invest in those projects so that we aren't solely sharing the cost of development, but are leveraging all private capital. So now I'll move back into that public comment summary. We have received public comment from 17 different organizations, distilling all of that into an amazing, very long spreadsheet. We are continuing to churn through our 282 different comments on different things. We have gotten comments from municipalities, rural communities, housing authorities, developers, insurers, and consultants. I think you have heard directly from many of those public commenters. I think notably Housing Oregon compiled robust feedback from lots of different organizations. And so I want to highlight and know that that was part of the public comment that was sent on last night. And so I'm aiming to be able to address a lot of those key flags, issues, and conversations. Again, I think I will kind of highlight that not all of the public comments are explicit to a QAP revision or explicit to the altitude of policy that we would have a Housing Stability Council adopt, but are all aspects that we are intentionally going to be responsive to and incorporate any of those comments that that are feasible to accomplish. Our process functionally, for those that haven't enjoyed a QAP in the past, is that we will certainly share a red line of it. What did we publish as a draft? How has that changed to the final? We will also have an appendix that has literally every single comment tracked and how we have responded to it, why if there's aspects of the comment that we either aren't able to adopt or aren't ready to adopt, we will be having discussion in that. And so certainly have our bar is to have public accountability around that, and that is the bar that we intend to hold. So I have, I guess I didn't say, these are the major theme areas that we have as we are synthesizing all of these and grouping them into themes. We've identified 6 different topics. I'll talk through each of those, what we have are seeing and what some of the pieces of that are reflected in the framework that we are asking you to consider for adoption today. So firstly, rural project concerns. I think this is an incredibly important and very impactful conversation that we are actively engaging in. I think as we had made our initial recommendations around the ORCA updates and all of this, we had considered we had identified that the set aside wasn't the best and effective way to ensure that there are sufficient projects across rural communities. I think understanding the scale and difference of a project in Portland or Eugene than a project in the Dalles, but also wanting to make sure that we have that all sufficiently covered. And so we have, I guess, in the response and in the Housing Stability Council packet, we have updated our recommendation for this adoption of the framework to ensure carry through of the set aside that includes rural development by nonprofit organizations through this biennia's resources, feeling like that is an important consistency to continue to do that and commit to, as we are getting legislative investment for the 25-27 biennia, come forward with an intentional strategy that really ensures that we have an active and effective and connected strategy for supporting rural development. I think we have done a lot of different strategies, but that it is time to really put that into a cohesive perspective and make sure that we're really engaging with rural communities to be meeting that need. We are also making, as it's really an ORCA commitment, we committed to continuing to refine, and we put in place a very strong definition of rural that had a lot of nuance to density, identified as we were going through the places where there were some interesting disconnects. And I think we had got amazing participation, conversation, engagement with rural communities and developers on those projects at the time, and so I've made a responsive and modest update to that definition, which I'll talk through in a moment. And then then there are certainly other comments regarding the set-asides. Right now there is we have a 10% required set aside for the 9% tax credit, where 10% needs to support nonprofit organization, and there is a request for that to be increased. And then looking at how we are considering what valid partnerships are, where is it that we have talked about this over the years with Housing Stability Council, wanting to make sure that when we are talking about partnerships, that there's a financial relationship in that partnership, and that it's not when, if a culturally specific organization is partnering with a higher capacity developer or higher experience developer, for that to have real equivalency and power and control in that. And so I think continuing to have those conversations is also reflected in our overall strategies. Then moving forward into the next couple public comment themes. One is the ORCA process and waitlist management. And I think that probably these are reflected in the public comments, and also conversations likely you have had some proximity to around how we are managing our waitlist, our ability to have projects enter in from same organizations. And so I think I wanted to just take a minute to just talk a little bit about how is the waitlist working, what is that strategy, and then also what is the why of the 2 project cap per sponsor. And so maybe I'll start with the 2 project cap per sponsor. Right now, as we were launching the ORCA, we knew that this was a new process and that we were going to be building a pipeline. And what that pipeline is effectively, it is a wait list. These are projects that have gone through the scrutiny of review against our evaluation standards in the ORCA and the impact assessment. So they have given us all of the policy information. What are they accomplishing? High level financials, but all of that deep dive. We have reviewed a strong wait list of projects. There are 23 projects on that wait list right now. That reflects resources, nearly 500 million in resources on a wait list. Those are projects that we've already screened. So if we had those resources available, we would be moving those through. And so part of why that 2 project cap per sponsor is really important is that the ORCA requires organizations and communities to prioritize the projects that they want to have public resources to support. And with a wait list already in place of 23 projects, I think it's something like 70 projects that are currently actively working on applications through that impact assessment. We know that if we didn't have a cap and organizations were not prioritizing, that waitlist will quickly become much larger, and it will not be based on what organizations are really wanting to make sure is prioritized. And so we are continuing to we will continue to refine that. We have put in a lot of we've put out some advisories with some, aiming for clearer and clearer guidance and understanding about how we are considering that wait list. And we'll continue to dig into that, both the website materials and communication materials, to make sure that we can get to much broader understanding of those strategies. I think in the first reviewed process, that's as we created the ORCA, we knew that we didn't want to focus just on competition, but instead we wanted to say we will take ready projects and move them forward. Developers and community were adamant that that they needed resource certainty before they could get to permit readiness and ability to close within 6 months. And so in response to that, we created an application that has time controls on it, but also let projects have some time between when we could give an upfront conditional commitment, which is what we receive, that initial reservation that we bring to you is that conditional commitment, that as long as you move your project through the process within our prescribed timelines, you can retain that resources. Now, I do know that we hear quite often from projects that are permit ready now and would be able to move forward right now if they got resources. And because that was not able to be implemented into our overall ORCA, where again, we want projects when they receive resources to go as fast as they can, but we created a structure where doesn't require you to move forward in just 3 months. That is how we have built. And I think we need to continue to evolve. As we add low-income housing tax credits, part of what we have built into our selection process for the 2025 private activity bonds is that we are prioritizing projects that are permit ready. We will be looking at projects that will prioritize use of the available 2025 private activity bonds. So those will be projects that will have to demonstrate that they are permit ready, that they can close within the 2025 calendar year. And in fact, I would like them to close earlier than the December, because the December projects somehow slip a month and then they don't become that year. But getting to that place of real explicit clarity. So our intention here is to practice in the ORCA, prioritizing resources by timeliness. Those resources, again, are time sensitive, and so that makes a lot of sense. And I think we'll learn from practice how that works as we build out that pipeline. I also think, in part of that, we had adopted, I think it was in May of last year, our funding calendar for the ORCA. And in that adopted funding calendar, we have held 100 million in LIFT resources intentionally to pair with 4% tax credits. And so as we implement the tax credits into the ORCA, those are resources that we will be leveraging to be able to ensure that we can have fully financed projects on our funding calendar to support closings this year. I keep referring to it as next year, and I remember we're already in 2025. And let's see, I know there's been some highlighted comments around developer fee. The developer fee was not published within our qualified allocation plan, and that is because it doesn't need to be in the qualified allocation plan. It has been moved into our general policy manual because those developer fees apply across all projects, not just tax credits. And I think there was a historic practice because the QAP in decades past had been the primary document that we had for adopted and documented process and policy. And we're really trying to make sure that we have consistency and aren't duplicating and potentially disconnecting ourselves. So I think that's a real administrative shift that is important functionally for us. But we have not made any recommendations to change any developer fees within our work. A lot of detailed and really thoughtful feedback on the bond fees and financial restructure. We are continuing to process through all of those. We are not recommending anything specific to the bond fees in this conversation. We were really using that public comment process as a mechanism for gathering that input. It was not ever part of the qualified allocation plan itself. And so that's just making sure that we can really dig into the weeds and all of the numbers and details on that. And so anticipate bringing that back at a future meeting. Preservation priorities continue to get really incredible feedback on the preservation framework, which we have had adopted. I think there was a national award at some point, and I think part of what we need to do and what we have been doing is continuing to engage, keep that framework active and live and effective as we see changes and shifts within our preservation enterprise of need. And we know that there is substantial need, both from expirations, but also financial insolvency and physical condition challenges from so many compounding issues and challenges in market and community and supplies. And so are continuing to have that. We have implemented generally a 60-year affordability requirement minimum. I think there are a couple exceptions. One exception, which is Article 11Q bonds, where we are able to put it in at 30 years, and then it is either repaid, and so those resources come back to the state, or they agree to an extended affordability to get to that 60 years to satisfy their loan. And so that is so we are not making further revisions at this time, but are continuing to work and think about other strategies to get to consistent 60 years. So we're having that expectation. I think we also know that where projects get to be old projects, there needs to be at times recapitalization and other interventions to ensure that they are continue to be service to community in a safe way. Let's see, cost efficiency versus quality. So I think there's concerns on different sides of this, that there are, will there be incentivized small units? Will there be, to kind of balance out better in the process or based on the subsidy? I think we're balancing all of those different dynamics because we have structured now our subsidy so that it's both based on how many bedrooms does your unit have. So 3-bedroom unit should and does cost more than developing a 1-bedroom unit. So there's additional subsidy. Additionally, we have added nuance to the area AMI that those units are serving. And so there's a logical connection there where a project is collecting 30% AMI rents. There will be much lesser ability for that unit to support paying a mortgage for the permanent debt on that project. A 3-bedroom unit gets higher income and rent payments than a 1-bedroom unit, and 30% to 60%. So we're trying to balance all of the potential unintended impacts by structuring that subsidy in a way that reflects that nuance across all of it. And so I think that is the kind of overview of the public comments. And maybe I'll just pause here in case there are questions that anybody would like to raise around public comments, or if you have any thoughts on kind of early questions about that, because I will next move into the framework that we've developed for the Housing Stability Council so that we can move forward with formalizing and finalizing response to public comment and incorporate the updates to the ORCA and the QAP to finalize later this month.
Hey, any council questions or feedback? Councilmember Harris.
Thanks, Chair Hall. Thanks, Natasha, for all the information. And I'm going to try my best to articulate my questions because I'm still digesting everything that was said. So bear with me. But the first question that I had is regarding the readiness criteria, and hearing about in the industry, at least that, or the day-to-day job that I'm in currently, about this question of if a project is ready on paper, but there's actually a project that's ready in terms of being shovel ready to build right now. I keep hearing that there might be more of those instances out there, and then are being held up in the pipeline process. And I'm wondering if there's any sort of data or overview that you could provide of those instances, while keeping the projects anonymous, of course. But I am just curious to try to get my head wrapped around the pipeline waitlist process, and understanding it better.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I would love to be able to come back to be able to provide a deeper cut of that. I think we have some good information, and it's not until projects actually receive the reservation that we see what actually happens in terms of all of those, the permit readiness. And there are a lot of assertions around readiness. A lot of those are certainly completely valid. A lot of those could be optimistic. And I think that's the place where kind of nuance and challenges to just prioritizing readiness across it, because what happens if the project says I can close in 3 months and then they don't, it is really challenging then to say, okay, well, never mind, you go back to the end of the list, because then they are much closer to ready because they've been working to get themselves exactly closed. So, but I will absolutely be able to share more of that at future meetings, and can consider that kind of an update that we want to provide around performance generally. I do think all of the projects that we are putting commitments to are saying that they are getting ready, that they are close, that they are, on the fast track to all of that. And I am also seeing that there is sometimes not really delivery on that. I think that there are a lot of the projects that we have put reservations to that are, not still quite ready, and we are continuing to push and make sure that there's really clear accountability around that aspect of it. And I think what we are able to do when we are launching the 4% process is really be able to choose the projects that are saying, I am permit ready, I have evidence of that, and I'm going to move forward really swiftly to do so. And so we'll make sure to kind of land that more specifically, and acknowledge that there are, things that we are continuing to learn as we move through our creation of a system that is based on a managed pipeline is effectively what we are doing. And I think there are some inherent challenges to the reality of our resources. We can't forward obligate our resources that are legislatively allocated. And so, if we think around, we have some resources like our general housing account program resources that's derived from a document recording fee. And so we can look at what are those recordings and what is that anticipated revenue. And so we've shifted that resource to be forward committed. So we're saying, let's make sure that we're not just banking money and waiting to put it into projects, but that we're saying, okay, well, that project, what if we look forward 2 years, we know we'll collect up, $20 million. So those are $20 million that we should think about programming today. It doesn't work the same when we are talking about the legislative resources like the LIFT funds that are legislatively allocated. And so there's some challenges in kind of getting too far over our skis I don't know, I guess that's just a saying, it's kind of funny saying. But yeah, so I think that's really it. And I think I am excited to be able to have the opportunity with the 4% to say, we're going to really put a high bar on this. We're going to act for specifics and action, and ideally get to the projects that can all really swiftly expedite to closing, and think that's the behavior that we would generally hope for all projects. And I think is part of also that system change where when project gets a reservation, that is the priority to move that through before we worry about the next project to come into application. But we are having some adjustment going on, and I'm again, I'll be happy to bring more detail around that back at a future conversation.
Thanks for that information. It's all very helpful. I just have a couple of quick additional questions. One is regarding the cost efficiency versus quality conversation or discussion. And I was wondering, and this I think also relates to the follow-up question that was mentioned earlier in the meeting too, about cost analysis of units. And I was just hoping to clarify if that analysis will be separated out per region, and then also population type that the project is serving, PSH versus affordable. Can you clarify that?
For the cost efficiency metric that and so I think we've gotten the comment around that. I think so in terms of scale for resources, for a kind of level setting, we have somewhere around 10 million in 9% low income housing tax credits. That's and so part of what we're trying to frame out in how we kind of make prioritize projects when there are more projects than we have resources available to fund that meet our kind of evaluation criteria. I think acknowledge that we are likely funding, a preservation project or two, and then a few projects across the state. So it's not a metric that is going to really, this is not the basis of all project decisions in ORCA, but this is one resource pool. And that functionally, we have laid out where we are wanting to look at priority policy investments around that, and then focus into the metric of, as we talked about, an alignment with the governor's executive order on production. Where are we making sure that we're getting the most units? And I do think that there's a nuance to the population served and where you are in community. And I think to that we have regions across the state. So there are like regions competing with each other in that prioritization and evaluation. And so that's one part of it. And then I think the other part is that our subsidy, again, is scaled to the AMI served and the, project type bedroom. So there's some level setting that happens because of that from a resource side. And so I think, and again, we're continuing to dig through all of the details and doing a lot of scenario modeling to really see that impact generally across all of the portfolio and what that waterfall might end up looking like. And I think that'll be something as we finalize the QAP to come back in February to share those details. We'll be able to speak to more of that deeper analysis and how it landed.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you again. I think that's all the questions I actually had for now. I
Great,
appreciate it.
thank you so much, Councilmember Harris.
Hey, any questions, feedback from the rest of the council at this point?
Okay, so hearing none, I will move into then what our framework is. And so this is the framework. Again, this is the high level policy frame under which everything will follow. And so everything that we are incorporating and adopting will be consistent and based on this framework adopted with Housing Stability Council. And so there are, build that down into 5 core pieces of our framework. Again, high level policy setting. The first element is pretty basic, but it's that we will incorporate tax credits into the ORCA. And so we will use that as the system. We will adopt our centralized application for those resources. Secondarily, we're making some modest updates. Well, I guess, yeah, some modest updates to our set-asides. I think, again, I talked earlier this morning in our prior recommendations, we had removed the rural communities by development in rural communities by nonprofits from that set aside. We have changed that. We are retaining that through this biennium's resources. I think we had given ourselves latitude to make those shifts at the end of the 2024 calendar year, but see that we really need to keep some consistency and make any updates to that includes a rural strategy as we get new legislative investment and initiate those into the ORCA. And then the other piece of that is really a technical piece in just the way that we have identified how we are applying our set-asides. One of our functional challenge as we implemented our regional set-asides across everything became the idea that preservation uses our preservation framework to select priority projects. Some of our PSH resources are using our PSH Institute commitments and selection processes to make those pledge those resource commitments. And so having the regional layer on top of that became much too challenging to balance ability to put resources to projects underneath that set aside. And so it's a very technical nuance to it all. I think it just overall will allow projects that are priorities underneath preservation and PSH to move forward. Each of those have geographic and equity metrics that are already selecting them. They all need to meet our standards within the ORCA. And so it just really allows those resources to go where they are most critically needed. And part of that is if approved, it will allow, some of the projects that we will see are recommended through the ORCA following this presentation to move forward as soon as today, if approved. Number 3, rural definition update. I talked also about this a little bit earlier. This is another technical revision to a definition to be responsive to challenges as we were practicing this in projects. Functionally, Mitch Hanush is here to be able to back me up with any very technical questions on this, but generally our economist and research and policy team have done a lot of engagement over, candidly, decades around a rural definition, and really built a very thoughtful and detailed strategy to do that, largely based on not largely, based quite a bit on density. And so what we were finding, though, is that there are sometimes census tracts in rural areas that are more densely populated, and the way the definition was all tracking, it then flagged those as urban. And I think the update that we are putting in here in that last bullet is to say, if you are a dense census tract, but you are more than 30 miles from the nearest MSA, no, that's rural. It's just a more densely populated census tract in a rural community. And I think this really just helps to resolve some of those odd places where that was showing up. Let's see, the 9% tax credits, and we've talked a lot. Again, I'm not having, in this framework you're adopting, we've provided lots of deep process and detailed issues as we were doing our engagement, because we wanted to make sure we were getting comments on that. I guess I should also acknowledge in the public comments, your voice is also reflected. We have consulted with you along the way. But in terms of the framework around tax credits, and we are required by the IRS to have a selection process, so not just first come, first served. So we are have recommended a 9% selection process. This is a process that will happen in advance of projects needing to do the deeper application in our impact assessment. And we have identified the key criteria that we will use that all projects need to meet to be able to do that. And where there are more projects than we have resources to commit to, we'll use a tiebreaker approach that will be detailed in response to public comment in the QAP. And I think I have talked you through, I think, these criteria quite often, and they're in your packet, so I will probably not just read them all to you right now. Let's see, 4% tax credits. I have a couple slides on this. I think key elements for the 4% process is our adoption of a housing authority owned set aside. This is something that we kind of implemented in a side format as we, it's probably a couple of years, longer time ago than I think it is in my mind, where our private activity bonds and 4% tax credits became vastly oversubscribed with all of the different public resources seeking to leverage them. And we decided as a state and a housing enterprise in cooperation with the housing authorities that we needed to have all groups working together strategy as we are seeking to prioritize private activity bond resources. So where housing authorities previously had gone directly to the Private Activity Bond Committee that is hosted by the state to access private activity bonds and 4% for projects where the state didn't have other resources in it, directly to that committee for resources, realized we really needed to have better ability to program all funds and not have place the burden of doing so on a private activity bond committee. And so we navigated to an agreement previously. We are really codifying that now in our approach and in our qualified allocation plan, that we are going to continue to work in collaboration and make sure that we are holding resources sufficient for housing authority owned projects that don't have other state subsidy in it, so that the housing authorities are still empowered and able to do the investments that they need to make on their portfolio and their local opportunities, as well as being able to apply for our resources for other projects, most certainly. But I think have landed that in collaboration and in agreement with the housing authorities. We have also, I think in the adoption of the tax credits into the ORCA, determined that we really did need to be able to have more nuance to the ability to prioritize projects based on timeliness. And I think not in an attempt to thwart a first come reviewed process, but instead to make sure that where we have those critical timed resources that need to be spent or could be lost, that we are able to pull projects based on that permit readiness. If we end up with more space in there and we have a wait list and we have readiness as that timeliness as a part of that. And so I think that has also been part of a lot of our engagement conversations, is ensuring that we preserve the discretion that we need to make sure that we can do that part of really focusing and on making sure that we can get all ready projects to fill places where there are resources available and we're at risk of not being able to deploy those to projects that can use them in the needed timeline. And then lastly is the per unit subsidy. This is, again, we have scaled it by bedroom size as well as by AMI. We have, this is a version that will be applying specifically to projects that are leveraging tax credits or the 4% tax credits, specifically and which is different, a little bit lesser than those the subsidy caps that we had previously adopted related to projects that are seeking only the GAP subsidy and not the tax credits to support them. And functionally, the general rule of hand is that a 4% tax credit, that again is a tax credit. There's then an equity investor that gives the project's upfront resources to fund the project development, and in exchange, that investor is able to get the tax credit, the federal tax credit. And that equity investment is generally assumed to be able to cover about 30% of total project costs. And so that's the rationale for those projects needing slightly lesser subsidy to support the development. And so I think that is the kind of coverage of our framework element in terms of next steps and what does this mean. So we're asking you today to consider the recommended framework as documented in the memo in this presentation. Once that recommendation is finalized, we will be able to do the work with our underneath our adopted Housing Stability Council framework to finalize and formalize public comment response, incorporate needed revisions into the weeds of all of those policies that we received public comments about. We will publish the red line along with all of those comments and work to finalize adoption with the governor's office or the governor. And once that QAP is then finalized, we're able to finalize the ORCA updates and begin offering resources. We are hoping that those pieces all continue to cascade in order and that so that we can be opening these application rounds as soon as February. From a timeliness perspective, I think that's really functionally really critical for the 4% resources, as we do have 2025 PAB available that we can commit to additional projects. We do have a really strong pipeline already in there, but the rest of projects will need additional gap funding, so we need these updates in place to be able to do that and offer them. And so so maybe I will just quickly do an ORCA pipeline performance. I think had committed to doing sharing, regularly monthly information and updates with Housing Stability Council about that. We are continuing to move projects onto the Housing Stability Council waitlist, and that waitlist is again, those are projects that have already been reviewed for their impact assessment. Those are projects that we have deemed to meet standards and are just waiting for us to have resources to be able to move forward. And you can see there the 23 projects currently waiting. There's 70 projects that are continuing to work on their applications. 21 that are still working through their financial eligibility, and one project that we have successfully financed. I think a lot of those timeliness for those in financial eligibility are quickly needing to make their next step. And so I think are expediting and focusing on all of that so that we are excited to see some more groundbreakings in the near term. But we're continuing to check that. We're making sure that we're capturing and talking with projects around any of their delays that are doing that. Again, we have agreed and are active in our collaboration for all of our pipeline projects, and also balancing that with accountability. So where agreed upon timelines and requirements are not met, we will make decisions to pull those resources and put it to a project that will be able to quickly move forward. And hopefully that's not very many, but I think it is a standard we need to hold in order to really effectively demonstrate that it matters, that we have a lot of projects that are saying that they could move forward and are not going to continue to hold resources for projects that aren't doing so. And so I think that is the kind of overview of how is the ORCA going, what have we recommended for this framework, and happy to talk about any questions or curiosities you might have, and otherwise ask you to consider the recommended motion for adopting the framework.
Hey, what's your pleasure, Councilmember Mena first?
Thank you, Chair Hall. I've been following this whole process, and it is an amazing piece of work. And I still get confused, even though I've been following throughout this process. I guess a clarifying question for me is, with the tax credits, specifically the 9%, most specifically, somewhat over the 4%, being that is competitive, I think I lost the track of when they get selected, where they fall in the ORCA. Did they not I know that they go into the pipeline, but in reference of position and funding, does it really matter of where they go because they got tax credits?
Yeah, I thank you very much for the question. It is a lot of information. And so I think we're continuing to figure out what are good ways to document and talk about it. It is also a lot of process and complicated financing and other policies and practices. And so I can't really expect that others need to master it. And so I think that's the piece that I'm navigating through all of this, and then really focusing then on what's the operational strategy. What do you need to know in community as a city or as a developer or as a county, how to navigate through. And so really from a user perspective. So the place where we have identified being able to do that upfront selection of 9% projects with very much a strong hat of not wanting to put a robust competition into a system that is not wanting to invest just in competing. And so instead wanting to really make sure, and I think that was part of the burden of a project, to be able to fill out all of our impact assessment detailed questions on all long litany of aspects, being able to provide sufficient documentation of partnerships and all of that it takes a lot of effort. And so really wanted to make sure that we can do a lighter touch selection and then make sure the project swiftly follows through on providing us with all of that detailed information. Once we told them, yes, go forward. If you continue to meet standards, we will give you these 9% resources. So it is, as our process, and I should have put the graphic in. So we have, before a project is formally applying for resources, they submit an intake application that's just giving us general information. And so if it is a project that wants to seek 9% resources, it'll be that general intake information, and I think will be and then a form. There will be a form that says, are you applying for 9% resources? If so, here's these criteria that we're going to use to really high level make sure that these are projects that should be prioritized for the 9%. And that's where that detailed list of criteria are incorporated. And based on all of that and the resources that we have available in their set aside, we will identify the projects that really meet the top of those and are able to move forward with 9% in their financial assumptions, and they will do the whole impact assessment. And if they, and we'll work with them and make sure that they are, we evaluate to make sure that they meet standards, are building all of that out into their projects. And we will be able to bring forward a resource reservation for projects that are that we have evaluated to not only be prioritized through our 9% selection process, but then also I have actually demonstrated that they meet the evaluation standards.
Thanks. A couple more things. That actually helps for me to see that alignment. There was a question in the public comment about in the ORCA, it talks about the ability for the proposals to meet whatever housing needs analysis or housing production strategy that they have identified, but there are cities that have not gone through that process yet, and they're not scheduled to go for some time. How is that be addressed in this round? Yeah.
So I think those are, I think that is, very true. There are formalized housing production strategies, largely in the larger jurisdictions, I presume, that are most subject and have been working most closely to the ONA related production strategies. And I think those are pieces of where we, whether it's formally or adopted or not, I think that's an aspect of a criteria that we are considering, and that we are not putting an extremely high bar, but we are signaling to our system that continuing to work in conjunction with all of the active efforts around housing accountability and production and the DLCD planning efforts, on down the line is where we are still analyzing, trying to understand, again, from that rural strategy, we have resources that need to be committed now, but are actively going to be having those conversations and see where our resources can best support. We do have and it's not always the 9% resources that are the best fit for projects, but it's also the case that within our GAP resources, we have broader ability. We have some dedicated resources through our home funds that we can also be leveraging to support rural communities. So want to understand in the mix of all of that, how we reflect and understand it.
Okay. A couple comments. One is in regard to the investment limits or the way that I understand that the reasons for it, completely get it, and there's not enough funding to go around for all the need that's there. With the limits, the only concern that I have is that there are certain projects that require or don't have the other investments that major cities or places where there's a lot of community will have, or there's the infrastructure is not there that needs to be built with the development that creates a bigger investment and makes it for a bigger ask, and that sometimes is detrimental to whether it's smaller cities or other areas that don't have those resources. And the last one is, I think has been said in the comments, and I think it was mentioned earlier, is the wait list, and understanding that it's somewhat of some way of, and I know it was noted on the PowerPoint about effort to incorporate feedback on the tracking and so that it's a little more transparent. I think that there's a lot of uncertainty about what's happening with all those projects, and like you mentioned, then I know it's an ongoing work, and it's just that I know I can sense that uncertainty and nervousness that's happening with all these projects are in this pipeline and they're ahead of me, but do they really are ready to move? I'm ready to move, and that type of thing. So
Yeah.
just those two comments, and again, this is a tremendous amount of work, and thank you for what you do.
Absolutely. And I think the rural conversation is active, and we're excited to continue to engage in it. I think we have scaled our subsidy limits to have higher limits within our rural communities, trying to acknowledge the reality of ability to do other resource leverage and other inherent, intricate challenges in all of across development fundamentally. And so I think there's that. I do think we have still in play a bunch of active investments. We had, it feels like a bit ago, but it wasn't that long ago, we had our home ARP resources where we also invested capacity funds into rural communities. So we had invested capacity resources within several rural communities that weren't quite ready to do their project. The idea was to have those communities work to put their project plans together. We are holding those home ARP resources still for those communities, and I think that was intended to go through sometime later this year. So we're holding resources through, I think, September is my recollection, although I will correct myself next meeting if not. And so I think, I'm curious to see whether there's any of those capacity investments really yield active applications. And so I think there's a bunch of different strategies that we've tried and just need a little bit of time to kind of regroup, understand, have the active dialogue with the rural leadership today, and then also understand to be able to see and forecast what we see. And so I think on the rural side, and I think we do have an existing waitlist resource policy. It is published on our website. We also do publish and share our waitlist. We do publish and share all of the projects that are in our application process. So there's a lot of them. So it is more, and I think, again, continuing to want to refine the simplicity of those tools so that maybe it's not the full spreadsheet that people need, but a shorter, sweeter list. And I think to the accountability for projects moving forward, I think we're trying to learn all of the great ways to do that. If like if we're looking at here, trying to reflect what is really actively going on. I think it's this financial eligibility project, you know, the pieces here where we're saying there are these projects that are still in financial eligibility. This is the first time our timelines are going to be summoned, and we are practicing this for the first time, and we are working to figure out what are some good ways to be able to externally share the status of this. And I think first we are investing in our systems and make sure that we are really holding tight to understanding the status of it, as we are also doing this for the first time. I think we have a really strong basis. We are understanding and then figuring out how to make some of that externally available without an overshare, but sharing enough of, you know, our projects proceeding, are they meeting benchmarks and all of that. And I will commit, and I can confirm that we are holding standards and we are tracking it all. And some of that we've been able to reflect in our external reporting, and some we're still trying to figure out the best way to make sure it's accurate across all of that. But we are, in doing so, also want to really prioritize making sure that project development teams understand very crisply what our expectations are and where they are not, you know, may not seem to be meeting them right now. They haven't failed them, so we're doing that, but we need to make sure, you know, clarity is kind. Want to make sure that we don't end up feeling like, oh, well, I didn't know that, so therefore that is, you know, inconsistent and insincere. And I think we want to operate from collaboration and sincerity at the same time as holding that standard. And again, we have also, it's also, as we started out with, it's big and it's complicated and there's a lot, and we have put a lot on our website, and we need to maybe hit a different bar of that to make it feel like a clear place of navigating, understanding.
Thank you. Just one point of clarification, and I'll shut up. In terms of the limits, I would say it's not just a rural challenge. You know, it's within the metro areas. For example, I'm thinking about Beaverton and cities in Washington County, where Beaverton is going to be annexing a rural area that will require a lot of infrastructure investment, right? And so those are the impacts that we're talking about. Thanks.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Hey, anything else from council at this time? Well, what's our next step?
I think, so yeah, I guess I see, oh, maybe that was anyway, the next step is to consider the motion in the Housing Stability Council packet to adopt the framework as presented. Again, if that we are adopting this high level policy framework, that will be the work, and we will come back at our next meeting to share the details of that and kind of continue all of these conversations, but with the ability to offer resources.
Councilmember Meehan.
Thank you, Chair Hall and Natasha. I appreciate all the hard work, and it is very complicated. And I definitely am one to say that it is. There's a lot going on here, and more than I really understand. I just wanted to address and make sure that we were hearing from that rural community about some of the challenges, you know, with capacity gaps and ready shovel delays, that kind of stuff. That we were hearing from them, and that we were leaving some space and time for them to be answered, because it's such a difference between the rural community and what's going on here in Metro and whatnot. So I just wanted to make sure that there was some of these requests that seem pretty simple, you know, for some transparency and, you know, support capacity building, things like that are just being addressed, or at least in the motion of, we see this and we need to work on this, or we see this and we need more information or whatnot. That's all I really wanted to make sure that we were being mindful of some of these comments from some of our rural communities who definitely have a different stake and understanding of what's going on for them.
Absolutely. Yes. I think, you know, I think that we have engaged over many years around this. We have a lot of intentional strategies built into different places and different ways. And what I am wanting to commit to is bringing all of that together into one broader picture and continue to have the conversations. I know Director Bell is also actively talking with many rural communities, and as our staff in ARH. And I think figuring out over the next several months how we really catalyze that conversation and bring back, as we get additional legislative investment, a perspective and a deliberate conversation around that perspective. In so many ways, the intent of the ORCA was really to make sure that there is ability for rural communities and to access resources and to make sure there's some leveling of that playing field. But it feels like, and also market fluctuations are tremendously impactful in all communities across the state. There isn't a singular rural voice. There isn't a singular urban voice. There are so many different nuances of conversations and topics. So it is, yeah, there are a bunch of very deliberate efforts that I think we are taking today, but I think it is a commitment we need to make to really bring that into a more deliberate vision and perspective, and we'll continue to do that work.
I appreciate that. And of course, my thing is, that follow-up data, like, let's get the numbers after the fact, but I guess that's going to be next year's conversation, right? Appreciate your time. Thank you, Natasha.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Councilmember.
Any other council feedback or discussion? Are we ready for the vote then? Okay. I believe we should procedurally, as chair, I should close the public hearing officially.
I think we do have one more, we have a couple ORCA transactions after this. If the framework is adopted, we'll be able to move those.
Okay.
Forward. Yeah.
Great. So let's move to those then.
I think, but I think Councilmember Lee moved our motion to adopt the framework. So I think we need a vote on that.
We need a second motion, please.
Okay, just a second to the motion from one of you.
Second.
Okay, roll call, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DiMattorum.
Yes.
Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yeah.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Harris.
Yes.
Councilmember Meehan.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thanks, everybody. Next item.
Great. Thank you so much. We're excited to wrap up all of that work and start offering more resources. And we are not wasting time. You have today 2 recommendations from the ORCA. And so I have Assistant Director Amy Cole here to be able to share those today. I will get the presentation on the screen, Amy. Go for it.
Thanks, Natasha. All right. Good morning, Chair Hall, Housing Stability Council members, and Director Bell. I'm Amy Cole, the Assistant Director of Development Resources, and I'm here to present 2 ORCA projects for your consideration today. Next slide, please. So as I always do, I'm presenting some just snapshot in time statistics about applications that we have in the ORCA. So I'm just looking at the impact assessment statistics. So we have 13 projects in impact assessment under review currently, 60 projects total in the impact assessment step. 29 of those are for-profit led projects, 36 are nonprofit led projects, 6 are housing authority projects. There's 1 tribal led project and 1 other led project. Next slide. All right, so the 2 projects we're going to be talking about today are Elm Park Apartments and Shelley Cove Apartments. And just one, we'll do Elm Park first. Thank you. And just wanting to note that there's 1 correction to the packet materials about this project. It's noted on page 22 of your packet that Elm Park Apartments is located in an urban area. It should say that it's located in a rural area. All right, so Elm Park Apartments is new construction, 32 units. It is sponsored by Our Coastal Village. It's located in Florence. And the request is for $12,235,000 in LIFT. Next slide. So Elm Park Apartment has MOUs with Siuslaw Outreach Services to provide services to the tenant population. This organization provides rental assistance, prescription assistance, self-sufficiency education, budgeting education, domestic violence services, and access to other services by referral. Our coastal village and the general contractor commit to reaching their MWESB participation rate. They know it's expected and have plans in place for reaching the goal, and OHCS will monitor their progress. Next slide. Thank you. Shelley Cove Apartments is a preservation project. It is 14 units. It is sponsored by Chrisman Development, and it is located in Port Orford. The request is for 4.1 million in preservation resources. All right. So Chrisman and Viridian Management have a robust set of procedures and best practices that they use to outreach to BIPOC communities in all of their developments. And that includes training materials, translation, partnerships with culturally specific and culturally responsive organizations, and community outreach. For this project, they are working to expand partnerships with CSOs in a very rural area. Chrisman and the general contractor are committed to reaching their MWESB participation rate. They know it's expected, have plans in place for reaching their goal, and OHCS will monitor progress. Next slide. So as I say in every presentation, if approved for funding today, projects will receive a letter of intent from OHCS and will move forward to the financial eligibility step of the ORCA. Projects have 6 months to complete the requirements of the financial eligibility step and move to commitment. In financial eligibility, a detailed development budget and pro forma will be closely analyzed by the production team to ensure that each project meets financial and underwriting standards, and to make sure that projects are leveraging debt and other resources that justify and support the state's investment. The final award for each project will be arrived at through the underwriting process in financial eligibility. All right, next slide. All right, so the motion is on page 20 of your packet. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Any questions, council? Councilmember Rogers.
Thank you, Chair Hall, and thank you, Amy, for the presentation. As I was preparing for the meeting and reading about the projects that are being presented, I was really excited. I'm glad to see that this is in Florence and it's rural. And so just want to say thank you for the work.
Thank you.
Anything further from the council right now? Well, is somebody ready to make the motion and somebody else ready to second it?
So move.
Second.
Okay, I think we've got it covered now. Thank y'all. And could we have a roll call, please?
Thank you, Chair Hall. Councilmember DeFontorum.
Mhm.
Councilmember DeFontorum.
Yes.
Thank you. Councilmember Farrell.
Yes.
Chair Hall.
Yes.
Councilmember Lee.
Yes.
Councilmember Mena.
Yes.
Councilmember Rogers.
Yes.
Councilmember Harris.
Yes.
Councilmember Mian.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion passes.
Thank you so much.
Now I believe we're at the point where we can close that public hearing. officially, and gosh, my agenda went and hid somewhere in this big stack of paper, but I believe we're at the conclusion of the agenda. Have I missed anything here? Nope. It looks like, huh?
That is correct.
All right. Well, we're finished, and we're even finished a few minutes ahead of our schedule. So I'll say thank you all, council, staff, public, for participating in this important work. And for those of you who can maybe recover this time for something else necessary, or even better, something fun, enjoy, and we'll see you in a month.
Bye.
We're adjourned.